I didn't think much of it at first, just another locked gate. Another private property sign slapped up by people who suddenly think owning land makes them king of it. But this one hit different, because that road they blocked, that wasn't just some random dirt path. That was legally mine to use, recorded, documented, older than most of the people trying to keep me out, and they looked me dead in the eye and told me to find another way in. Yeah, that's when I knew somebody was about to learn a very expensive lesson. See, my place sits on about 25 acres, nothing fancy, mostly trees, a small rental house I keep up for extra income. Been in my family since the late 70s when my parents bought it as raw land, back when nobody cared about luxury developments or exclusive communities. Back then, it was just dirt, trees, and one gravel road that cut through a neighboring farm. Simple arrangement. The farmer gave my parents a permanent easement, legal right-of-way, so we could access our land, paperwork filed, county approved, everything clean, and for over 40 years, nobody had a problem with it. Then, everything changed when the farm got sold. Not to another farmer. Not to someone who actually needed the land, but to a development company with glossy brochures and big promises. They came in with bulldozers, marketing teams, and that whole, "We're about to upgrade this area," energy. I remember the first time I heard the name, Horizon Ridge Developments. Sounded like something out of a real estate seminar, not something that was about to turn my quiet access road into a battleground. A few months later, construction started, trees cleared, roads paved, signs went up. Silver Pines RV Estates. Yeah, not just any RV park. This was one of those high-end setups where people roll in with $500,000 motorhomes and expect spa-level amenities. We're talking manicured lawns, security gates, curated nature experiences. The kind of place where people pay for the illusion of isolation while sitting 10 feet away from their neighbors. And right in the middle of all that was my road. Now here's where it gets interesting. One afternoon, I see this black SUV pulling up, clean, polished, the kind of car that screams, "I don't do manual labor." Out steps this guy, mid-40s, perfect haircut, sunglasses like he's auditioning for a real estate commercial. He walks up like he already owns the place, and technically, I guess he thought he did. "Hey," he says, sticking out his hand. Name's Ryan Caldwell, project manager for Horizon Ridge. I shake his hand, already knowing this conversation isn't going to end well. He starts off polite, too polite. You ever notice that? When someone's about to ask you for something ridiculous, they always ease into it like they're doing you a favor. "So, we've been reviewing the property layout," he says, pacing a little, looking around like he's assessing value. "And we're a bit concerned about outside traffic using our internal roads. You understand, right? Our residents are paying for exclusivity." I just nod, let him talk, because I already know where this is going. "So here's what we're thinking," he continues. "We'd be willing to offer you, say, $25,000 to release your easement, and we'll even help you build a new access road on the east side of your property." Now, I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so out of touch it felt like a joke. "Have you even looked at that side of the land?" I ask him. He hesitates, which tells me everything I need to know. "That new road you're talking about?" I say. "It cuts through dense woods, drops into a ravine, and would take at least 2 miles of construction to make usable. You're talking about a 6-figure project, minimum." He shrugs, still smiling, but now it's tighter, forced. "Well, we're open to negotiating." And that's when I shut it down. "No," I tell him. "The easement is legal, it's recorded, and it's been in use for decades. I'm not giving it up." And just like that, the whole tone shifts. His smile disappears, not completely, but enough, like he's done pretending. "Look," he says, voice a little colder now. "We can't have random vehicles driving through our resort. It's a liability. It affects the experience we're selling." I lean back a bit, cross my arms. "Then maybe you shouldn't have bought land with a recorded easement running through it." Yeah, he didn't like that. He gives me this look, half irritation, half calculation, like he's already figuring out his next move. Then he nods, says something about revisiting the conversation, and walks back to his SUV. And for a while, nothing happens. Construction keeps going, the resort starts taking shape, everything looks normal, and I almost think maybe they dropped it. Maybe someone in their legal team actually read the documents and told them to back off. Yeah, that was wishful thinking. Because a few months later, I drive out to check on the rental property, and that's when I see it. A gate. Not just any gate, a heavy steel one, locked, bolted into place like it was meant to stay there forever, right across the only road leading to my land. And next to it, a sign. Private property, residents only. I just sit there in my truck for a second, staring at it, trying to process what I'm looking at, because this isn't a misunderstanding anymore. This is deliberate. I get out, walk up to the gate, rattle it. Solid, no way through. I look down the road, see the freshly paved entrance leading into their resort. Neat, polished, and completely off limits to me now. I pull out my phone, call Ryan. Straight to voicemail. Call again, same thing. Leave a message, nothing. And that's when it really hits me. They didn't just ignore me. They went ahead and blocked me out anyway, like I didn't matter, like the law didn't matter, like they could just build over a problem and it would disappear. I remember standing there, hand still on that cold steel gate, thinking, all right, you want to play it this way? Because here's the thing. I'm a pretty reasonable person. I don't go looking for fights. But if you push me into a corner, especially on something that's legally mine, I don't back down. And what they didn't realize, what they really, really underestimated, was just how badly they'd miscalculated. Because this wasn't just about a road anymore. This was about access, rights, and a mistake that was about to cost them a whole lot more than $25,000. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things go from annoying neighbor dispute to you just stepped into a legal minefield. And if you've never dealt with easements before, this might sound like a gray area, but it's really not. According to standard procedure, an easement isn't some casual agreement you can renegotiate when it becomes inconvenient. It's a recorded property right, tied to the land itself, not the person. So when Horizon Ridge bought that property, they didn't just buy the land, they bought the obligation that came with it. From a legal perspective, blocking an established easement is a big deal, like court order, injunction, financial penalties kind of deal, especially when that easement is the only access point. Because now you're not just interfering, you're effectively landlocking someone's property, which courts really don't like. But here's where it gets more interesting. This is a psychological trap developers fall into all the time. They assume control equals ownership, meaning once they invest millions into a project, they start thinking they can reshape the rules to fit their vision. And when someone like me doesn't cooperate, they see it as an obstacle to remove, not a right to respect. And the lesson here is, the moment someone with money starts treating legal boundaries like suggestions, they're usually already setting themselves up for a much bigger loss than they realize. So yeah, after standing there at that locked gate for a good 5 minutes, calling a guy who clearly wasn't planning to pick up, I did the only thing that made sense. I called a lawyer. Now, I'm not the type who has attorneys on speed dial, but I did have someone my family had worked with years back. Different situation, land-related stuff. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: when someone blocks your legal access, you don't argue, you document, and you escalate. So I reach out to this attorney. Let's call her Dana Mercer. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who doesn't waste words unless they matter. I explain the situation, send over the easement documents, the recorded deed, everything. She calls me back later that day, and I can hear it in her voice, that little pause before she speaks. Yeah, she says, they can't do that. No hesitation, no it depends, no legal gymnastics, just straw. To the point. They're in violation, she continues, and not just technically. This is pretty clear-cut. That's when I knew they had really messed up. Dana drafts a formal demand letter that same night, lays everything out, cites the easement, the county records, the fact that they've physically obstructed access, and gives them 48 hours to remove the gate. Not a suggestion, a deadline. We send it over to Horizon Ridge's legal team. And for a moment, I think maybe this is where it ends. You know, someone on their side reads it, realizes the exposure, tells Ryan to cut the nonsense, and open the gate before it turns into something bigger. Yeah, that didn't happen. Instead, 2 days later, we get a response from their attorneys. And let me tell you, it was one of those letters that sounds confident on the surface, but the more you read it, the more you realize it's built on shaky ground. They start talking about ambiguity in the easement language, suggesting that the original agreement might not apply to modern roadway configurations, throwing in phrases like changed land use conditions, basically trying to argue that because they upgraded the road, the rules somehow changed with it. And then, this part almost made me laugh. They suggest I utilize alternate access options. Alternate access to a landlocked property with one recorded easement. Yeah, okay. Dana reads the letter, leans back in her chair. Well, I imagine she did, because her tone had that energy, and just goes, all right, we're done playing nice. Next step, emergency injunction. Now, if you've never heard that term before, here's the simple version. It's basically asking a judge to step in immediately and stop someone from continuing harm before the case fully plays out. Because here's the reality. Every day that gate stayed locked, I was losing access to my own land, my rental income was at risk, and the situation was escalating. So we file. And then we wait. And waiting is the worst part, because legally, things are moving, but in real life, you're still stuck dealing with the problem. For me, that meant parking my truck off the side of the highway and hiking nearly 2 miles through uneven terrain, cutting through brush, just to reach my own property, carrying tools, checking on the house, making sure nothing was falling apart, all because someone decided they didn't like the idea of me driving down a road I had every right to use. And I'm not gonna lie, at that point, I was frustrated, not just at them, but at the situation, because even when you're right, it doesn't always feel like you're winning. But then, something clicked. I was walking back one evening, cutting through the edge of their development, and I noticed something, small at first, utility markers, power lines, water connections, all neatly installed along the same path as that original road. And it hit me. Something my dad had said years ago, back when we first talked about the land. An easement isn't just about access, he told me once. It's about infrastructure. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But standing there, looking at those lines running right alongside the road they had just blocked me from using, yeah, now it mattered. So I called Dana. Hey, I said. Quick question, easements cover utilities too, right? She pauses, just for a second. Why? I explain what I saw. Another pause, longer this time. And then she laughs. Not a loud laugh. More like the kind you make when something suddenly goes from bad to very, very interesting. Send me pictures, she says. So I do everything I can find. Markers, connection points, anything showing how the infrastructure is laid out. She calls me back the next morning. And now, her tone has changed. This, she says, is where it gets serious. Turns out, that original easement didn't just grant access for a road. It explicitly included utility rights, power, water, communications, all running along that same corridor. And over the years, those lines had been installed, legally, based on that easement. Which means, every single connection Horizon Ridge had set up for their resort, the electrical hookups for those luxury RVs, the water supply, the lighting, the pumps, was tied into infrastructure that existed because of that easement. My easement, the one they were currently blocking me from using. Dana doesn't even hesitate. We're amending the filing, she says. Now it's not just about access anymore. Now we're talking damages, interference, potential liability with utility companies. She reaches out to the providers, power, water, telecom, gets engineers involved, requests documentation, and within a few days, we have confirmation. Everything, and I mean everything, in that resort is running through lines located within my easement corridor. And that's when it really sinks in for them. Because suddenly, this isn't just a dispute with one property owner. Now it's a situation where, if pushed, their entire operation could be affected. So we head into the hearing. Courtroom's not packed or anything. These things rarely are, but you can feel the tension. Ryan's there, sitting with 2 attorneys this time, both looking like they bill by the minute and don't lose often. They start first, talking about development standards, community expectations, how the project was designed with controlled access in mind, trying to paint this picture where I'm the disruption, the outlier, the guy refusing to cooperate with progress. And for a minute, they sound convincing. If you didn't know the details, you might even think they had a point. But then Dana stands up, and she doesn't raise her voice, doesn't get dramatic. She just walks the judge through it. The recorded easement, the uninterrupted use for over 4 decades, the physical obstruction, the gate. And then, she introduces the utility maps, explains how the entire resort is drawing from infrastructure located within that same easement, shows photos, diagrams, documentation from the utility companies themselves. And you can actually see the shift happen. The judge leans forward, looks over the papers again, then looks up at their side. So, he says, calm but sharp, your client is blocking access to an easement, while simultaneously using that same easement to operate their business? Silence. Not long, but long enough. Their lead attorney tries to respond. Something about interpretation, about evolving land use, but it doesn't land. Because at that point, the contradiction is obvious. And judges, they don't like obvious contradictions. The ruling comes down quick. Gate comes down, within 24 hours. No exceptions. And if they don't comply, $10,000 per day in fines. Yeah, that got their attention. I didn't even make it home before my phone buzzed. Message from Dana. It's done. Check the road tomorrow. Next afternoon, I drive back out. And there it is. The gate's open. Actually, not just open, gone. Removed completely, like it was never supposed to be there in the first place. I just sit there for a second, engine idling. Looking down that road I hadn't been able to drive for weeks. And I'll be honest, it felt good. Not in a petty way, more like balance had been restored. But we weren't finished. Because getting access back? That was step one. What they did, it had consequences. So Dana moves forward with the full claim. Damages, legal fees, lost rental income. Everything tied to the period I was blocked out. And this time, there's no real fight left in them. They try to negotiate, sure, float some numbers, but the leverage has shifted. Completely. By the time it wraps up, the court awards compensation, covers the losses, the legal costs, and most importantly, issues a permanent injunction. Meaning they can never, ever block that access again. Not now, not later, not under any excuse. And Ryan? Well, a few weeks after everything settles, he reaches out. Different tone this time. No SUV swagger, no polished pitch. Just cautious. He makes an offer. Wants to buy my land. Says it would simplify things for the development. Offers $400,000. And I just laugh. Not out loud this time, just to myself. Because now, it's not about the money. You had your chance, I tell him. And you chose to put up a gate instead. He doesn't push after that. And honestly, I don't think he expected me to say yes. Because at the end of the day, this whole thing, it started with them thinking they could control access. And it ended with them realizing they never had that control to begin with. So yeah, that's how a simple gravel road turned into a full-blown legal mess. And if you strip away all the drama, all the personalities, all the back and forth, what you're really okaying at is a story about control. Who thinks they have it, who actually has it, and what happens when those two don't line up. Because here's the thing, situations like this, they happen way more often than people think. Not always this extreme, not always with a locked steel gate and a courtroom moment, but the underlying pattern, it's everywhere. You've got someone who invests a lot of money into a property, builds something impressive, creates this vision in their head of how everything should function, and then reality shows up in the form of an old agreement, a legal detail, a line on a map that doesn't fit their plan. And instead of adjusting the plan, they try to force reality to adapt. That's the mistake. From a legal perspective, property rights don't care about your business model, your branding, or how much you spend on landscaping. If there's a recorded easement, it exists whether you like it or not, and trying to ignore it, or worse, physically block it, isn't just risky. It's almost guaranteed to backfire. But honestly, the legal side is only half the story. The more interesting part, at least to me, is the psychology behind it. This is a psychological trap, and it's a subtle one. When people pour time, money, and identity into a project, they start to see it as an extension of themselves. So any obstacle, like a neighbor exercising their rights, doesn't feel like a neutral factor. It feels personal, like interference, like disrespect. And once it feels personal, rational thinking starts to slip. Instead of asking, what are the legal boundaries here? They start asking, how do we get around this person? That shift? That's where bad decisions start stacking up. Because now you're not solving a problem, you're trying to win against someone. And in this case, that mindset is exactly what cost them. They could have worked around the easement. They could have redesigned the layout. They could have offered a realistic solution, one that actually covered the cost of a new road, or maybe negotiated shared access terms that made sense. But they didn't. They went with pressure, then avoidance, then outright obstruction. And each step made the situation worse. The lesson here is, when someone shows you who they are in a negotiation, especially early on, you should believe them. That first conversation with Ryan, that wasn't just a casual offer, it was a preview. The lowball number, the lack of understanding about the land, the subtle shift in tone when I said no, all of that pointed to one thing. They weren't planning to respect the boundary if it got in their way. And once you recognize that, you have to adjust how you respond. You document everything. You stay calm. And you let the system handle it. Because trying to out-argue someone who's already decided they're right, that's a losing game. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, all right, cool story, but what does this mean for me? Here's the practical side of it. If you own property, or you're thinking about buying, learn what's attached to it. Not just the land itself, but the rights, the restrictions, the easements, the agreements that come with it. Because those things, they don't always show up in the listing photos. They're buried in documents, in county records, in lines most people skip over. But they matter. A lot. And if you're on the other side, if you're the one developing, building, investing, then it's even more critical. Because once you commit to a project, your flexibility drops fast. You can't just move roads, reroute infrastructure, or undo construction without serious cost. So if there's an easement, you deal with it up front. Not later. Not when it becomes inconvenient up front. And maybe the biggest takeaway here, the one that sticks with me the most, is this. Respect goes a long way. If Ryan had come to me with a real conversation, no pressure, no assumptions, just honesty. Hey, this is the situation. How do we make this work for both of us? There's a good chance we could have figured something out. Maybe not perfect, but workable. Instead, he chose control. And control, when it's built on the wrong foundation, doesn't last. So yeah, that's my story. And I'm curious, what would you have done? If you were in my position, do you take the $25,000 and walk away? Or do you stand your ground and risk the fight? And if you've ever dealt with something like this, neighbors, HOAs, developers pushing boundaries, I'd honestly like to hear it. Because the more you see these patterns, the easier it gets to spot them before they turn into a problem. And trust me, it's always better to catch it early, before someone decides to put up a gate and learn the hard way what it really costs to ignore the fine print.